All right, cool. So welcome to Wednesday night. Welcome live stream. I don't know, usually there's about one or two people watching on live stream, so thank you guys for watching. So as per tradition, I am not Jody. So if you're watching and you think I'm Jody, I'm not. He will be back next week. Speaking of Jody, he sent me. So I do have a gym joke of the week. Jody sent me your email. He thought this one was really funny. So Jody, if you're watching, I did get your email. So the joke of the week, it says, a man was driving down the road when the light turned yellow just in front of him. He did the right thing and stopped at the crosswalk, even though he could have beaten the red light by accelerating through the intersection. The tailgating woman behind him was furious and honked her horn, screaming, cursing in frustration as she missed her chance to get through the intersection. As she was still in mid-rant, she heard a tap on her window and looked up at the face of a very serious police officer. The officer ordered her to exit her car with her hands up. He took her to the police station where she was searched, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. After a couple hours, a policeman approached the cell and opened the door. She was escorted back to the booking desk where the arresting officer was waiting with her personal effects. He said, "I'm very sorry for this mistake. You see, I pulled up behind your car while you were blowing your horn, giving the guy in front of you the finger and cursing at him. I noticed the 'What Would Jesus Do' bumper sticker and the Choose Life license plate holder and the chrome-plated Christian fish emblem on the trunk, so naturally I assumed you had stolen the car." So if you wonder why we do not have Christian Center window stickers, that's one of the main reasons. And seriously, like we talked about getting those window stickers, and we're thinking, like, how many times have you got cut off or got flipped off by somebody and you saw in the back of their car the church's logo, be like, well, I ain't going to that church. And so we're just trying to avoid some future problems with that. Yeah, but we don't have that. So welcome tonight. Thank you for coming. Let's pray and we'll get started. Jesus, thank you for this time, Lord, that we could be together, God, under your name. Lord, I pray over each person, God, in this room, God, each person that's watching or will watch. Lord, I pray that you just bless them. God, help us learn a little bit more about you tonight. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so you guys are going over Ecclesiastes, okay? And so last week you went over Ecclesiastes chapter 2, I think all of chapter 2. So today we're going all through Ecclesiastes chapter 3, okay? So it's the whole chapter 3. It's not that big, but it's cool. So if you've ever read Ecclesiastes, you understand that book at first glance can be a little depressing, if you will. I mean, the whole first part of it is saying everything is meaningless, like why even live? Like it's just all terrible. But we'll get through this a little later, but it actually is more than what meets the eye. So here's a quote from a guy named Joseph Wood Crutch. Okay, he's a professor at the Columbia University from 1937 to 1952. He said, "There is no reason to suppose that a man's life has any more meaning than the life of a humble insect that crawls from one place to another." So I'll read that one more time. "There is no reason to suppose that a man's life has any more meaning than the life of a humble insect that crawls from one place to another." Do you guys agree with that statement? Like when you first hear it, do you agree that a man's life is no more important than a small insect, a man or woman? Say men, like mankind. Obviously, we're a little bit more important than insect. I mean, there is whole companies that make their fortune off of spray to kill insects. There's whole, like we use a place called H&K Pest Control. They're out of Lovington, and their whole existence is to kill off little bugs and mice and all that stuff. So you would think that a man's life or mankind's life is a little bit more important than an insect. But there's a lot of people in this world that believe, it's like there's whole entire religions that believe that an insect, that being is, well, that's what it is a being that some religions believe that it's reincarnated, like a reincarnated soul that came back as a bug. I don't know what you had to do in your life to come out as a bug, but, and there's some different organizations that believe that insects or fish or animals in general have the same value as human life. And I'm not here to argue that. I'm just saying, like, as far as this statement is concerned, I think most of us would agree that our lives as mankind, men and women, have more value than an insect life. So I think for most of us, we believe that there's something grander involved with human existence. I would even think that atheists and PETA and all those organizations alike think that on some level. So even those organizations that say they believe, religions and all that stuff, that say they believe that an insect or an animal life is the same as on the same level as a human life, I guarantee that if they were put to the test, that would probably not be the case for most of them. But us as Christians have to believe that our existence means something greater than just a mere speck on the cosmos. You know, you always hear the argument, like with, with like space exploration, or that guy that's like aliens. You know, have you ever seen that meme, the aliens guy? You know, all these different documentaries, he shows about aliens, about extraterrestrial life. Everyone's saying that, you know, these people are saying that we are just this tiny dot in a vast universe, you know, which essentially is a true thing. I mean, us right here, right now, we are but a mere tiny little atom, a speck compared to just our sun, just the sun. And then you put it against a bigger star, a superstar, whatever they're called, and you put it next to something bigger, and you put it next to a galaxy. I mean, we are yet a small speck in the universe, but the difference between us and something else and anything else is that we have Jesus. You know, that is the difference. That's the difference between anything, any religion, anything ever, is that we have Jesus. You know, and if you believe in Jesus, then you're inherently saying that you believe in the Bible, this trueness through and through. And in the Bible, it says that he cares, if he cares about flowers and sparrows and all these things, then how much more does he care about us? That he said that when he looks at us, when he created us, that it was good in his sight. It was that he loves us so much that he sent his only son. We can go all day on this. But in saying that, yeah, we may be this small speck in the vast galaxy, but we are loved by the God who made that vast galaxy. You know what I'm saying? So it's not, we are not meaningless. You know, and Solomon, if you just read the first part of Ecclesiastes and there's just turn the page and you're done with it, then you're just sitting there saying, well, this Solomon, who's supposed to be the wisest man to ever live, is just depressed all the time. You know, apparently I don't want to be that wise because I was be depressed all the time. But Ecclesiastes, and I'll get to this later, like I said, but Ecclesiastes is one of those books in the Bible, which is every book in the Bible, that you have to read all of it to get a part of it. You know what I'm saying? So if you just read the first part of Ecclesiastes, everything's meaningless, nothing's new, why even live? You know, and then you close the book like, well, that stinks. You know, why would I even do that? But Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it starts to change there. So going back to this, insects have life cycles, but we have histories and legacies that last throughout the generations. One bee is pretty much like another bee, but every person is unique and no two stories are the same. You can write a book titled The Life of a Bee, and it's pretty accurate across the scale of all bees of that species. But you can't write the life of a man or a woman because each person would require volumes upon volumes of information just to even cover their personality. And this is a statement, this is a really Solomon statement here, but hear me out. If we are not unique, then that stands to say that we are not important. If we are not important, then that stands to say that life has no meaning. And if life has no meaning, is it worth even living? We might as well follow the Epicurus philosophy, let us drink, for tomorrow we die. You know, who's heard that statement? You know, it's been said differently a lot, but like if you ever seen the movie 300, you know, with Gerard Butler, that movie, he said, you know, tonight let's drink, for tomorrow we dine in hell. You know, he says, and it's kind of the same philosophy. It's like, hey, might as well enjoy what you got because it's going to be gone in any second. You know, and so there's a lot of people who live their whole lives based off that I have no meaning. You've probably heard this a lot, but to me, it takes a lot more faith to be an atheist than it is to be a Christian, because you have to believe, which is kind of contradictory, you have to believe as an atheist that your existence on this planet means nothing, that you have no meaning. You're here, you were born, you die, you go to dust, then that's it. And there's some that, that kind of, that have their own philosophies in that, but essentially, like, as Christians, we essentially believe that our existence here, as long under the authority of Jesus, our existence here has actual purpose. You know what I'm saying? That each and every breath you take has a purpose, that your existence is there to not only help your family out, your kids, your whatever, but also anybody that surrounds you. As Christians, our relationship with Jesus, this is probably not the right time of history to say this, but our relationship with Jesus should be contagious. You know what I'm saying? It should be something that when somebody looks at you, you don't even have to mention the name of Jesus for them to be like, I want what you have. Like the book of Esther, I believe, I'm pretty sure that not one time in the whole book of Esther that it mentions God. It even says the word God or Jesus or any of that. Obviously not Jesus, because that was before Jesus. But it's a story that when you read it, it has God all over it. It has everything in it it has a person who was willing to lay down their life to save a people group. If it wasn't for Esther, Israelites as we know them would be wiped out, would be extinct. But that story has God written all over it. If you do it right, if you do the Christian thing right, you don't have to walk up to somebody and say, hey, I'm a Christian, and for them to be like, oh, you're a Christian. Because if you have to do that, then it probably means that the way you're living, the way that you're presenting yourself is not of a Christian lifestyle. But if someone looks at you and says, hey, why are you always so joyful? Why does people come up and ask you to pray for them? Why did all these different things that can happen, and you can confidently say that because I'm a Christian. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, Solomon has presented 4 arguments proving that life was nothing but grasping broken soap bubbles and chasing after the wind. But listen to this. He was too wise a man to let his own arguments go unchallenged. Do you hear that? He was too wise to let his own arguments go unchallenged. I think that in our lives, and you could probably, if you go back to when you were 15 years old or however old you were when you started forming your own opinions, and think about the things you used to believe in when you were 15, 16 years old, even 25, 24 years old. Do you still follow everything you said, everything you believed when you were that age? Most likely not. There's probably some things, like maybe a foundational belief in Jesus. Hopefully that's something you still follow. Maybe there's some principles that were instilled in you by your parents or grandparents or whoever that you ingrained as part of your life. But there's probably some things that you believed in as a younger person that you may look at now and be like, oh, that's not good. I was listening to an interview by a man named Judah Smith. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Judah Smith. He's what some people would call him as a fad pastor, but I think he's so much more than that. He's pretty deep. There's an Instagram channel called Sneakers and Preachers, or Preachers and Sneakers, one of those, and it's essentially this guy finds these preachers like Stephen Furtick, Judah Smith, all these high-end preachers, megachurch preachers, and he'll take a picture of their shoes, and then he'll look up the price of their shoes. And Judah Smith sometimes has shoes on that cost like $5,000 or something like that. And so, and it raises a whole question about, these people buying these shoes like this, but it's another thing. But he had an interview where he was saying that he preached a sermon one time when he was just starting out. So Judah Smith inherited the church that he got from his dad. And same thing like Andy Stanley, same thing with several bigger well-known pastors. He inherited the church from his father, and he preached a sermon. And he even wrote a book about this sermon when he was like 20-something years old. And he was on this interview saying that he had to make a revision of that book out of his own pocket and go publicly saying that a lot of things that he said in that book he no longer believes in, or no longer, he says that they were something that I believed as a younger Christian, but when I actually followed God for a longer time, it's something I didn't. And so this elaborate long story to say that there's probably some things that we've said or did in our younger lives that we may at that time fully grasp and believe in. But now, once you are wiser, you now say that that was probably something I shouldn't believe in. And so that's kind of what Solomon was going through in this moment. He says, but he was too wise of a man to let his own arguments go unchallenged. So I think we need to let that sit for a little while. What are some arguments, or what are some things that we have said that we maybe need to challenge in our lives, things that we believe, or maybe something that your parents told you, grandparents, pastors, anybody in your life told you that you fully grasped onto but never really challenged. I mean, really, there's a lot of people that believe the quote, cleanliness is next to godliness is in the Bible. It's not anywhere found in the Bible. And there's a lot of different examples like that, but there's people that were told these things that to know them as true, but they're really not. So Ecclesiastes, like I was saying earlier, Ecclesiastes is a book that needs to be read in its entirety before you can form an opinion, because Solomon says a lot of depressing stuff, but if you keep reading it, he challenges pretty much everything he says and proves a lot of it to be actually something that's hopeful and something that has true meaning. And keep in mind, all this was before Jesus, okay, when he wrote all this stuff, but it has Jesus all over it. Obviously, the Word was with God, the Word is God, and we understand the Word to be Jesus. So everything about the Old Testament has to do with Jesus in some way or another. But a huge problem in the church community, in the church in general today, and one of the big reasons why people leave their faith is because they read one passage in the Bible and take it out of context. This happens all the time, all over the day. You see those interviews on news networks or whatever, whether I'm not saying this taking sides politically, it's not a political thing. It's just saying whether Republican, Democrat, whatever, say something. Okay, they say something in a vast, big conversation or vast presentation that they have, and the media will take one snippet of that and say, this is what they said. This is what, and it's really not. Like there's this, I remember this one time, there was a time where Trump was saying that we should all inject ourselves with bleach to get rid of the coronavirus. And so that's what people took out of the whole thing. People took that one little part and said, Trump said to do this, and and that was it. But what he was actually doing, if you listen to the whole interview, he was actually making fun of the CDC because they had a whole published documents by these people who were supposed to be the top of their fields, the top of the line. They had a whole published things saying these ridiculous things that we should do to get rid of the coronavirus. So he went on to say a large flash of light, because he was basically quoting what the CDC said, that if you expose yourself to flashes of light, that it should get rid of the virus in your body. This is what there's published documents by the CDC. He was merely just quoting what they were saying, but the media took that one snippet out, and for the mass majority of the ignorant, country, and ignorance just means you don't know. That sounds like a big mean word, but it just means you don't know something. Like a lot of people are ignorant about technology. That just means you don't know how to work it. And so the vast ignorancy of America and the world just took that one little part and said, Trump said to inject yourself with bleach. And that could be taken in pastoral leadership. That could be taken in your own personal life. I mean, I know with I don't have kids, but I know being a kid, and, my mom would say something, and I would take it out of context because I would just listen to the part that affected me. And then I was like, you said this. She's like, I said that, but you didn't hear this part. And I'm sure maybe you have stories with your kids that they may have taken something out of context you said, or the times where your parents would tell you something, and then you would go to somebody else and they would tell you the exact same thing, and you'd be like, Mom, guess what this person told me? It's like, I just told you that. That happened all the time. My mom constantly stayed mad at Jody and Haley because they would tell me something, I'd go home. This is what they told me. He's like, I just told you that yesterday. But yeah, that's a whole other thing. So Mom, if you're watching, I'm sorry. Solomon, his argument in chapter 1, verses 4 through 11, was the monotony of life, what was the monotony of life, but then you read his rebuttal in chapter 3 through chapter 5. And so his rebuttal to his own arguments, which I think is so funny, he wrote this whole thing. If you ever wrote something out, you pretty much know what you're going to write later. So he wrote his arguments out and then answered them by himself. So I thought that was funny. So he discovered 4 factors that must be considered before you can say that life is monotonous and meaningless. So when I say that, in the first chapter of Ecclesiastes, he goes on and says, famously, says that everything is meaningless. Yes, everything. That nothing new is under the sun. It has a whole list of how just life is just terrible, and that's kind of famously what he said. But like I said, he discovered 4 factors that must be considered before you can say that life is monotonous and meaningless. So number 1, he saw something above man, a God who was in control of time and who balanced life experiences. So that's chapter 3, 1 through 8. He saw something within man that linked him to God, eternity in his heart, chapter 3, 9 through 14. He saw something ahead of man, the certainty of death, chapter 3, 15 through 22. And then he saw something around man, the problem and burdens of life, which Jody will actually talk about that one in bulk next week. That's in chapter 4. So essentially, Solomon asked his listeners to look up, look within, look ahead, look around, and finally to take consideration of time, eternity, death, and suffering. So those are the factors that God uses from keeping our lives from becoming meaningless and monotonous. So the factors of time, eternity, death, and suffering are the things that keep our lives as Christians, and keep that in mind, as Christ followers, as people who believe in Jesus. Those things is what keeps our life from being meaningless and monotonous. And Solomon goes on saying that. So tonight we're going to talk about the first 3 factors. So the first one is look up. God orders time. So chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. So in those, let me pull it up here. So those, he goes into a list of things saying there's a time for a lot of these things. So I'm going to say the word time a lot, but just forgive me. So this is the chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. It says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, time to be born, a time to die, time to plant, time to harvest, to kill, to heal, to tear down, to build up, a time to cry, a time to laugh, a time to grieve, a time to dance, a time to scatter stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, and a time to turn away, a time to search, a time to quit searching, to keep, to throw away, to tear, to mend, to be quiet, a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. So that's pretty much a direct contradictory of, not contradictory, but just a direct rebuttal, if you will, from what he said in the first chapter, when the first couple verses in chapter 1, because he's saying well, everything is meaningless, so why even go about this? But now he's saying there's a time, so he's answering his own question here. And so going back to it, see, you don't have to be a philosopher or a scientist to know that times and seasons are a regular part of life. No matter where you live, no matter where you live, let's say in this sentence, sorry, where it is not the dependability of God-ordained natural laws, both science and daily life would be chaotic, if not impossible. Not only are there times and seasons in this world, but there are also overruling providences in our life. And this is good. From before our birth to the moment of our death, God is accomplishing his divine purpose, even though we don't always understand what he's doing. And I want to make that clear. As a Christian, we are not required to understand. Okay, we are not required to understand, but we are required to obey. Okay, and God in that will grant understanding. Okay, but if you walk into the Christian life, if you walk into that and you just want God to give you all these answers and say, well, I'm not going to believe you if you don't give me this answer, if you don't like you pray for something and it's not immediately right in front of your face, then a lot of people just turn away and they'll say, God's not real, or maybe I'm just don't have enough faith, or whatever their excuse is. But they don't understand that you don't have to understand. The entirety of every character in the Bible, every person in modern days that's used by God, every single person, they were told to do something and they did it. It wasn't, did you see the kind of the consequences, if you will, of questioning? So you see, like with Moses, God said, hey, go free these people. And he was like, I'm not the guy. I'm not your guy. And he's like, well, you are. And he's like, I'm not. So God's like, well, now he forfeited a lot of the blessing he would have gotten, which went to Aaron, because Aaron was the one that carried the staff. Aaron was the one that, that had Moses had the leadership but Aaron was the armor bearer, the one that had the power, if you will, that God granted, because Moses questioned God, therefore forfeited all the blessing he would have received. Then Aaron was later made to be the high priest of the tabernacle, and it was in Aaron's line that eventually became where Jesus came into play. And so because of the obedience of Aaron, his lineage is Jesus. And I think that's really cool. It's something to really pay attention to. So in 14 statements, Solomon affirms that God is at work in our individual lives, seeking to accomplish his will. Now, this is a hard truth, and I want us to hear this. This is a real hard truth, that God works in our lives to accomplish his will, like just what I just said. But I want you to hear that when God moves in our life, when God heals, when God shows up, when God does the things he does, whether past, present, or future, and all throughout the Bible, it is there to accomplish his will. And so when God moves, it is because that moment in time, that area in life, or area in your life, or a healing perhaps, or whatever it is, that's going to be the biggest accomplishment of his will. That's where most people are going to see, and not just see, but most people are going to experience God in those moments. That's why a big reason why corporate church like this, like people coming together in a building and worshiping God, that's a big deal, because God's will be accomplished in that through his people. And that's why it's a big deal to be ordained in ministry, not just be good at speaking. You know what I'm saying? To be ordained in worship leading, not just be a good singer. There's a list of to be like ordained as a parent, or as whatever you do. I mean, to be ordained in that is a big deal. Basically that means to allow God to move in that, and for God to call you into that. So I've always said this, that since God invented time, he is always on time. You see, if we operate in God's timing, then our lives will never be meaningless. So I think it's so cool, because there's a lot of us that go through the motions and then one day wake up and realize that we might have wasted our lives. And you hear that all the time. You're someone that just one day wakes up and just like, what have I done with my life? I am now whatever age, and it's too late for me to do this, too late for me to do that. What have I done with my life? And you hear those stories all the time. But because God's timing is so perfect, that when you fall into the will of God, when you follow God, that timing is perfect. So in your life, in that moment, it's not meaningless. It's not wasted. Just all you got to do is pick up and go and follow who God has called you to be. So like I said, we go through the motions, you wake up and do that. But an encouraging side is that the day you wake up and realize that you may have wasted your life, then all you have to do is get on God's timing, then regain your purpose. Like it says in verse 11, yet God made everything beautiful for its own time. See, a life lived for God is a life well lived. And I'm not just saying that as someone who was just, raised by Christian parents or went to a Christian school. I'm saying that from a person, and there's a lot of stuff you guys probably don't know me, and probably stuff you don't want to know about me, but I've been down the roads, several roads. I've been down the drug route, been down the alcohol route, been down all that stuff. And I could tell you story after story of where I didn't rely on God, where I put myself first, where I put what I wanted to do first, and didn't put God first. And I can tell you exactly where that led me. But the moment I surrendered and said, God, you got to show up, because obviously what I'm doing is not working. And the moment I surrendered is when God showed up. And yeah, I could have let my life go to waste. My whole side of my dad's family and my mom's really are all alcoholics. Every one of them, it seems like. And if you are watching, we'll talk about this later. But I don't think they are watching. But if they ever watch, stop drinking. So there, a lot of them, they probably tell you that I'm not. But the absolute second they get home, they're plastered for the rest of the day. And so it's priorities in that. But the moment you surrender your life to God, it's hard. It's not easy. It requires you to sacrifice a lot. It requires you to drop maybe some friendships that you had. It requires you to reconsider what you thought you were passionate about. Reconsider the road you were going down, maybe a job you have. It requires you to really do a lot of soul searching, but it is worth it. Even the most difficult time in life can have its own beauty. all you have to be willing to do is peel back the layers and see how God is working through it. So most of the statements that Solomon says, so he says those 14 statements, a time to live, time to die, all those statements. There are 14 of them. So most of them are self-explanatory. Most of them you can kind of just read it and it's what it is. But there's a couple of them that I picked out that need some more explanation. And this is where studying the Bible is really awesome. This is where if you go into like the lexicon or like the meaning of certain words, or go into kind of deeper and look at people that are much smarter than you or me, and look at what they had to say about it and apply it and see how that factors in to what he said. So there's a couple of these that we'll go over. So the first, in verse 2, it's a time to be born and a time to die. So things like abortion, birth control, mercy killing, and surrogate parenthood may make it seem like man is in control of birth. Now, some of those things are wrong, but like surrogate parent, all that stuff, that's not a wrong thing, okay? But it's in that notion, that idea that some men, mankind, when I say men, I mean all men, women, mankind, but where some mankind may think that they have the authority over life, over like where life can be had, where it can not be had, all that stuff. And it feels like that we have control over birth or death. But Solomon thinks otherwise. Birth and death, listen to this, birth and death are not human accidents. They are divine appointments, for God is in control. We see in Psalms 139, 13 through 16, that God formed us in the womb, that our genetic structure is perfect for the work that he's prepared for us to do. And I want that to sink in. Now, this story, I can expound on it, but I'll make it short, is I have a full hip replacement in my left side. I have a metal hip in my left side. Before I got that, my whole ambition in life, everything I wanted to do was join the Marines. My dad was a Marine, a bunch of cousins, grandpa, the whole lineage thing. And so I wanted to join the Marines. That's everything that I did was to do that. But I always had a bad hip, but it was always still just bone. It was never there. But I had to get a replacement because I was at risk, and I don't know how this makes sense, but I was at 110% risk of a heart attack at age 15 because of the pain level I had. I don't know how you can be past 100%, but the doctor said to me, 110% risk. And so they checked my heart every month to make sure I didn't have many heart attacks or something like that, because I always had pain like in my chest and all that. That's a long story. But so I still tried to join even with a hip replacement, and long story endless, they said I couldn't join. So I was lost, and so then I got a job, got fired from that job, then went to school, and then didn't really like what I was doing there. So then I had a crossroads where I would go to Oklahoma, where my family lives, and go to school there, or go to Atlanta to a master's commission. And a master's commission is essentially a very hands-on ministry training program. Everything you do is hands-on. It's like a Bible college is mostly book study. It's mostly you just learn about this stuff. A master's commission is a little of both. It's not as much book study, which is important. I want to make that clear. It's very important to know the Bible, know the history, know all that stuff. But the program I went to, you went and did the stuff the Bible said. You went in Atlanta. Atlanta has the largest sex trafficking ring in North America is through Atlanta. There's a place called Seven Bridges that I don't even know. I've been to some of the worst parts of the world, and Thailand, through like places in Japan, places in France, all these places in Dominican Republic. I've been through those places, and it's terrible. I'm telling you, Seven Bridges is, if not worse, it's almost exactly the same, if not worse. It's a terrible place. And it's right next to, if you've ever been to Atlanta, you have the Westin Hotel. It's like the Cylinder Hotel. And then you have another building that's kind of like a Sharp Point. And then on right below that, on the other side, there's this bridge. And that's where all of it, it's really bad. And so we went there and did that. And so I went to that place and realized that God ordained me for ministry. At that point, I was just good at doing some things. I was decent at playing guitar. I was decent at singing. So I did, but in that moment, those moments, I realized that I'm called into this. I'm called into pastoring people. I'm called into leading worship. Whatever I'm supposed to be doing, God called me into that. And so that's where I realized that. But in long story endless here, is if my genetic structure with the disease I was diagnosed with that caused my bones to do what they did, I would have probably joined the Marines. I would have probably stayed there a long time, and who knows where my life would be now. But because of my genetic structure, that it says here that that God formed us in the womb, that our genetic structure is perfect for the work He's prepared us to do. So that means that, and at least in what I believe in my life, that if I didn't have that disease when I was a little kid that ate away at my hip bone, then I would have never been here right now serving in the capacity that I'm serving. Who knows where I would have been? And maybe that's the same for some of us in here. Maybe you have a genetic structure or something going on that you may not seem that's fair, but realize that God has built us and works in us through what we have. And then because of that, if you tap into that, then God has His perfect will and has ordained us for that moment. And so, like I said, our genetic structure is perfect for the work that He's prepared us to do. In Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things He has planned for us long ago. And you see, I read in Ephesians, but long ago would have been in Psalms, when Psalms was written, saying that we were formed and that He knew us in the womb, that our genetic structure is perfect for His work. And so it all comes full circle. Now, we can foolishly hasten our death. We can go to our death quicker because of decisions we make, but we cannot prevent it when the time comes unless God so wills it. There's a cool story in the Bible about a man named Hezekiah. He was going to die. In fact, God said, you're going to die. God said, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. This is God telling him that. It wasn't just some dude, some dude coming up and say, hey, you probably should, get things in order, you're going to die. This is like God saying, like, hey, you're going to die pretty soon. You probably should get things in order, But then Hezekiah was like, that's not cool. This is the David version of the story, but that's not cool. I don't want to die. And he prayed about it, all that stuff, and God said, okay, you can live for 15 more years and all that stuff. So imagine knowing that you're going to live. You know without a doubt, because God said this, and when God says something, it's a big deal. So without a doubt you're going to live 15 more years. What would you do? What would you do with your life if you knew that you're going to live for 15 more years? Now, this isn't some like science fiction movie. This happened. This is real life. This is something that God lengthened this man's life and told him that you have 15 more years to live. I think about that, going like, what would I do if I had 15 years? Because 15 years seems like a long time. In the grand scheme, it's a very short amount of time. And so, like, what would I do in my life differently than I'm doing now if I knew I had 15 years? All the days ordained for me were written in your book, Psalms 139:16. So the second thought, the first thing was birth and death. The second thought in that same verse, in verse 2, was the thought of planting and plucking. During those days, the Jews were very much appreciative of the seasons. In fact, their religious calendar was based on the agricultural year. So you can look at Leviticus 23. It goes through like all their holidays and all the stuff that they believe, like their religious practices and stuff, and it goes through all that, and it's all based around the agricultural year. Men may plow and sow, but God the only one can give the increase. Psalms 65, 9-13. So when I hear that verse, when I think about that, I remember this interview I saw once where this pro athlete, I forgot his name. I don't know names of pro athletes, but this one person said, like the interviewer said something like, oh, thank God you were able to do that, or something about God. And the guy made it a point to stop everything and say, it wasn't God that gave me the ability to do this. It wasn't God that got up at 4 a.m. and ran. It wasn't God that did all this. He said, God has nothing to do with my talent or ability. That's what this pro athlete was saying. And when he said that, what went through my mind was that verse. Men may plow, do the work, and sow, do the work. I mean, if you've ever done any of that, when I was a kid, that's what my dad, he planted stuff and we, harvested it. And that's a lot of work, but God is the only one that can give the increase. So yeah, that pro athlete did that work, but where did his opportunities come from? Where did his passion and drive for that sport or whatever come from? Where did all that come from? Yeah, he worked for it, but who gave him the increase? Who gave him that power, that ability? So that if you ever think that you're the one, that you yourself, and I'm the one that accomplished this, I'm the one that did this, you need to check yourself real fast. Because yeah, you may have put in that work and you may have that drive, but who gave you that? Who gave you the passions you have? Who gave you the ability to do what you have? And so that's as far as planting. And then the plucking or the harvesting of things may refer to reaping or the pulling of unproductive plants. Now, when you pull weeds, is it a simple, easy act, like just pulling a weed out of the ground? Maybe if the water is wet or the ground is wet, maybe it's easy. But most of the time when you're pulling weeds, it is something that you have to what? When you're pulling your weed, what do you have to do? What do you have to make sure you have to do? Get it at the root. Okay, and that is a violent process for that plant. Even if it's a weed, it's a violent process. It is taking it out from the root. And when I see that, when I say plucking is referring to reaping, or reaping is another thing, but pulling unproductive plants. And that leaves a challenge in our lives. What is something in your life that's unproductive that needs to be plucked, needs to be pulled out? What is something, maybe a thought pattern, maybe a past that you won't let go of, maybe something you won't forgive yourself for, maybe something you won't forgive somebody else for. Whatever it is, it could be a list of things. But what's something in your life that you need to violently pluck out of your life? Now, when that weed is plucked out, there's a lot of times there's a big hole left over. It may have affected the plant that was healthy, and whatever it did. But when you do that, you've now given the plant that should have life, that should have value, a better chance to live. Now, what happens if you leave that unproductive plant or that weed in the ground? What's something that can happen? It can spread. It can corrupt what was supposed to be good and turn it bad. Now, I know you get the spiritual implications behind that. A lot of times, if you don't pull something from the root in your life, whether if it's an addiction, if it's a thought pattern, if it's even something, and this is not simple, but something as simple to say as not reading the Bible or praying. If you don't pull that from the root, then it could be something that can corrupt the good parts of you, the parts that maybe you do trust in God right now, but you keep denying Him, you keep not praying, not reading your Bible, not seeking God, and then that trust will fade. That maybe something you relied on God for a long time, but then you stopped and you didn't pluck that out by the root, so now you don't trust in God at all. Anything. It's very important to get rid of unproductive plants or unproductive things in your life. A successful farmer knows that nature works for him only if he works with nature. This is also the secret of a successful life. Learn God's principles and cooperate with them. So in verse 3, that was verse 2. So verse 3, it talks about killing and healing. This is most likely not referring to war, okay? It's not referring to war or self-defense, but it's the results of sickness and plague in the land. 1 Samuel 2, chapter 2, verse 6, the Lord gives both death and life. He brings some down to the grave, but raises others up. A lot of people would seem that to be unfair, right? Like, why would God purposely bring some people down and raise some people up? It says God permits some to die while others are healed. This does not imply that we should refuse medical aid, for God can use both means and miracles to accomplish His purpose. See, like what I said earlier, it may seem unfair that others may go down and others be brought up, but everything that God does is going to produce or going to accomplish His will. You know what I'm saying? So everything that He does. So if He brings something down, that means it's supposed to be brought down. Even if it's something in your life that you feel like should be brought up. You know, if God brings it down, then you should keep it down. So that's verse 3. Verse 5 says, it's a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. So this is really interesting. I like this one. It kind of gave a little history here. So stones, in and of themselves, rocks, stones, whatever, are neither good or bad. It's a medium. It's just a rock. You know, in those olden times, they used to stone people to death. It wasn't the rock's fault that it got thrown at someone's head and killed them. Okay, it was the person throwing the rock, and we can have that argument anytime you want. But but the stone neither was good or bad. It was the person using the stone, that threw it. So it's like I said, stones are either good or bad, but it all depends on what they use them for. Okay, and like I said, there's a lot of modern day arguments that follow that as well. But here's the thing. If an enemy, so in that time, let me give you a little history. In that time period, back then, in that area, and still to this day, the fields, the lands were filled with rocks everywhere. Like, I mean, just kind of out here. If you want to go put a house down or plant a garden or whatever, you got to get rid of the rocks. I mean, they're everywhere. You can't even go like a half foot in the ground without hitting some rocks. And it's the same in that time, in that land, as they had stones everywhere. So in order to have a productive field, they had to get all the stones away. But this is kind of funny. If they were mad at their neighbor or mad at someone around them, they would gather all their stones and go put them in that other person's field. And so it's kind of a way to be like, hey, I don't like you. Now you got to pick up a bunch of stones. And so it's kind of that thing. So in saying that, and here's this, I love this. If an enemy fills your land with stones, don't cast them back. Build something with them. I love that. I love that. If an enemy fills your land with stones, don't throw them back. Build something with them. You know, I won't go into that because that's self-explanatory. That's so good. If someone tears you down, makes you belittled, makes you say terrible things to you, don't take that to somebody else. Instead, go to someone and build them up. Tell them good things about them. Give them encouragement. I mean, how many times have you had a bad day and you went home and were mean to your spouse or mean to your kids? Or how many times has maybe someone at your work treated you bad and then you treated someone else bad at your work? I mean, and the whole bullying principle is usually a bully is someone who's treated bad at their home and they take it out on someone at school. I mean, that you could have 1,000 examples, but instead of taking what someone has given you their junk, take that and build something with it. Build something with it. And that's what it says. And like I said, I gave the story in those times, the lands were riddled with stones. But the stones were not just cast away, they were used to build buildings. In fact, if you go to Jerusalem, modern Jerusalem, they use modern stuff to build. But if you go to the stuff that was built thousands of years ago, it was built out of stones. Where did they find them? In the land. They found them. They were in somebody's yard. They took them. They built houses, structures, things that even Jesus walked on. Also in verse 5, there is a time to embrace and a time to turn away. So this is kind of funny. People in the Middle East in that time and even today, they showed their affection by kissing and hugging. So when a guy, girl, whoever, when you walked up to somebody, you hugged and kissed them. You know, even like you see like the most famous kiss ever to be heard was Judas kissing Jesus, you know, like that. But that was a custom. That wasn't just something that just happened on that day. Pretty much every time in that time period, even modern days, when someone is greeted, they would be greeted with a hug and a kiss. So from now on, I'm just playing. What if that's the way we did it here? There would be a lot less people in the church to tell you that. Like, don't go to Christian Center; they kiss you there. But yeah. But that in that time. So in a way, it says it's a time to be embraced, a time to turn away. But essentially, it's saying there's a time to say hello, and this is a big part. And there's a time to say goodbye. There's a time to have relationship, to have. Now I'm not talking about marriage. Okay, that's a whole other topic. But talking about like maybe there's some friendships in your life that are there now. There's a time to say hello. There's also a time to say goodbye if necessary. And so in verse 6, it says getting and losing, a time to search and a time to give up for loss is another translation, and this is good. And the next phrase gives biblical authority for garage sales. So getting and losing, like I said, another translation is a time to give up, or a time to get and a time to give. So I love that this footnote that this guy puts biblical authority for garage sales. You know, if you have, there's times in your life where you need to gain. Maybe you come to church and you gain some, you essentially fill your cup up. You come in here, Pastor Jody, whoever, maybe through the worship, through whatever, you gain this knowledge, you gain this insight, and God fills your cup up. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to go and dump your cup out. Tell what I say every Sunday. And I don't know if you know I do this on purpose. I'm not just like a loss for words. Obviously, I can talk forever. But I say this every Sunday because there's power in it, that I say that God give us opportunities to talk to other people about you because what? That is our call as Christians. And then I say, give us favor in our family and our finances and whatever else we put our hands on. May you bless that. And I say all these things every week because I believe there's power in that, hearing that this place right here, right now, is just the church gathering. This, even though we call this the church, we are the church. We are the change this world needs. And that's why I say that every week. So there's a time to get, like what's happening right now. There's a time to give. And that's what, so in verse 7, tearing and mending, it probably refers to Jewish practice of tearing one's garments during a time of grief or repentance. God expects, and here's a big deal, God expects us to sorrow during bereavement. So if someone important to you dies, it's biblical. Jesus cried when Lazarus died. Jesus wept, shortest verse in the Bible, right? He cried when Lazarus died. There is biblical precedence to be sad over something, but here's the big deal right here. It says God expects us to sorrow during bereavement, but not like unbelievers. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18 essentially says that there comes a time where we need to get the needle and thread out and start sewing it back up. There's a time to be sad, a time for bereavement, but unbelievers, essentially saying in those times and even today, unbelievers, they will spend, like those different pagan religions and stuff, they'll spend years mourning people. I mean, the same death. And yeah, it's okay to miss somebody. It's okay to be sad that they're gone. But they spend years and years and years, ceremony after ceremony, of trying to, some of them trying to bring the person back to life. Some of them, they just can't move on. But it says biblically that there's a time when we need to pick up that needle, pick up that thread, and start sewing things back together. And then verse 8, loving and hating. Are God's people allowed to hate? We asked that question. It's saying that there's a time to love, there's a time to hate, but are we allowed to hate? And in Psalms 97:10 says, if you love the Lord, anybody know the rest of that? You hate what is evil. If you love the Lord, you hate what is evil. And there's other references in 2 Chronicles 19, verse 2, Proverbs 6, 16 through 19, Revelations 2, 6 and verse 15. There's a lot of biblical precedents to say that, hate in its general term we shouldn't do, but there are biblical precedents. If the word hate is used in the Bible, then pay attention to what it's talking about. Then life is something like a doctor's prescription. Taken alone, the ingredients may kill you, but properly blended, they bring healing. God is sovereignly in control and has a time and purpose for everything. So this is not fatalism, nor is it rob us of freedom or responsibility. It is so in saying that, and having this idea of that God orders things, God ordains things, there's a time for death, time to life, all those time things. It doesn't separate us from the responsibility we still have as Christians and Christ followers. But what it does is it gives you wisdom and knowing that, and this is what I'll close on. We are all in this room going to die. It's going to happen. Whether it's tomorrow, whether it's 100 years from now, it's going to happen. And that is what makes life beautiful. Makes every second of life beautiful. All the mundane days you spend at work, all the whatever, the everything in life is what makes that beautiful. There's a movie. Raise your hand if you've ever seen the movie Troy with Brad Pitt. Yeah, there we go. There you go. It's you don't have to know the movie to know what I'm talking about. But there's a moment in there where in Troy is essentially a story of Achilles. What's his Homer? That guy. It's a whole story about him and like Odysseus and all them. But he was saying that the gods, that you have Zeus and all the gods, saying the gods envy us because we are mortal, because we have death in our life. And obviously I'm not promoting belief in Zeus and stuff, but I'm saying that there is, and through all of media, all of history, all of everything, there is saying that our life is beautiful because of our death. And here's even more, in a broader sense. Our life is beautiful because of our suffering. I'm not talking about, being tortured or anything. I'm saying that are being a Christian is not an easy thing. It's not something that you should just be like, oh, I'm going to be a Christian because I want to go to heaven. Yeah, that's cool. But becoming a Christian is not something that makes your life easier. In fact, there's presidents saying that your life may get a little more difficult. But it's going to be worth it. The wise Rita Springer said in her song, it's going to be worth it. Because when we die, we may die from this world, but we will be raised again in Christ. We will live for eternity in Jesus. Now listen, either side, heaven or hell, you will live for eternity. Okay, that's going to happen. But do you want to go to heaven? Do you want to live with Jesus? Do you want to be in the glory of God? Or what real death is? Yeah, we may die in this life. We may stop breathing in this body. But real death, true death, is eternal separation from God. That's real death. That's the death you should be scared of. It's terrifying. I mean, the idea of being eternally separated from God is too much for me to bear. And so even if just like the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even if God isn't real, say that all this stuff we're doing is just some dudes in a Catholic church made up. Just say if that is real. Even if that is real, I will still live my life for other people. I'll still live my life for a purpose, that Jesus died on the cross, rose again on the third day, that he is the only way to heaven, that he's the way, the truth, the life, that because of him, I have peace, I have joy, I have purpose, and that my life is bigger than myself, and it's actually meant to help other people. So that's where I'll end tonight. I still have a whole lot more, but I'll end there tonight right at 8 o'clock. So you can go ahead and stop the light. Thank you guys for watching on live stream. If there was anybody, I hope there were. If you're going to watch, thank you so much. God bless you.